The death of musician David Bowie shocked a lot of people this week, in part because it seemed to come out of nowhere, didn't it? Most people, myself included, had no idea that Bowie had been battling cancer for 18 months. And of course, it's his right to keep that sort of thing private. It's also perfectly acceptable, even for a public figure. But what it does is it illustrates just how differently people deal with cancer. So here to talk more about the psychological impact of that is Dr. Dornelas. Oh, I'm sorry, did I just get your name?
Yes,
oh, there we go.
Absolutely.
I ask and then I get off topic and then I forget. But Dr. Dornelas is the Director of Quality of Life Services at the Hartford Healthcare Cancer Institute. Thank you so much for joining us today, really.
My pleasure.
I know you can't speak necessarily with authority about Mr. Bowie's case, but did it surprise you somewhat that somebody who has been in the public eye and therefore so open chose to be private about his cancer?
It doesn't surprise me, but I think that same shock that you feel and I feel, imagine how he must have felt. Mm-hmm. And so people deal with cancer in such a variety of ways. You know, it just violates that sense that we all have that we're immortal and that we're going to live forever. And people cope with it in a great variety of ways. I think keeping it private makes a lot of sense for somebody who's given so much to the public already. The sense that then they have to share their journey, their personal journey, with everybody is very understandable that they might not want to do that.
Okay, even for somebody who has been very public about other parts of his life that would normally be private. Yeah, it's just, it comes down to an interpersonal decision on a case-by-case basis, I get the sense.
Absolutely. And to some degree, I think a lot of people would argue that he really did share his journey through cancer by the artistic works that he did later. You know, we can see so much of his thought and emotion in his play and his last album. There's just a wealth of information. And I think the decision to share it that way rather than to go public, it's hard enough to cope with your own emotions when you have cancer, but to cope with other people's emotions and the general public's emotions, I think is asking quite a bit when you've got a very limited amount of time and you've got to use your resources and your time in the way that makes the most sense to you.
Now, being an artist, of course, came naturally to him, but is that something you've seen a lot in your practice, that people will deal with this in, I guess for lack of a better word, more abstract ways, through song, through art, through dance, through whatever means are necessary?
Yeah, I think that cancer is really a catalyst for most people. It's such a wake-up call to realign your priorities and think about what's important. And so the idea that then finding where the quality of life is, finding what gives your life the most meaning, what helps you to give that sense of transcendence and that you're going to leave your mark on this world, I think a lot of people do want to pour themselves into activities that are more meaningful for them when they realize that we don't have unlimited time.
Are there ways that people deal with cancer diagnoses that, in your opinion, are unhealthy?
You know, yeah, absolutely. There are healthy coping mechanisms and unhealthy. Obviously, the real unhealthy is, drinking or using drugs or checking out in that way. Sometimes trying to keep it too private, if you're afraid that your emotions are going to bleed through, and the reason that you're trying to keep it private is so that you don't break down, that can be very, very difficult for people to maintain. In those situations, I think it's very helpful to get comfortable with talking about it, because that just means there's a lot of emotion and you're having difficulty containing it.
What are some of the other big struggles you see people have right after a diagnosis?
It depends a lot on the diagnosis. So there's a big difference between a life-threatening diagnosis where you're told you have a very limited amount of time and it's not going to be a curative cancer, versus a diagnosis where it's a cancer diagnosis with a great prognosis, very curable. Universally, though, everybody gets anxious. Everybody has difficulty. It just really is a huge wake-up call and something that realigns almost everybody's priorities.
Do you find then that because the priorities shift, that maybe it is or it isn't in their best interest to try to continue on with the rest of their life as normal, their hobbies, their work? Or is that a case-by-case basis as well?
I think in general most people do want to go on with their life. I think they do want to focus on the things that are that they do every day, taking care of their kids, living their life, spending time with the people that mean the most to them, doing their job. Some people do all of a sudden use that as a reason to say, you know, maybe I want to retire now, maybe it's not something that I want to keep doing. But I think in general, most people do want to go on with their day-to-day life activities and keep their lives normal.
And you do what you need to do, and that's sort of, I guess, the broadest brushstroke I could put on it. All right, Dr. Dornelas, thank you so much for your time and your knowledge. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.